Okay, I see the participants joining us. Great, we are now live. Welcome everyone to today's webinar on research data management. We hope that you will enjoy the experience. We are fully booked. We have over 200 registrants and participants are muted, but please use the chat to introduce yourself and direct any questions or comments that you have. And we will address them during the Q&A session towards the end of the presentations. So this webinar is being recorded. There'll be a recording available on the My Science Work YouTube channel. And today's webinar is organized by My Science Work, and I'm Sally, your host for the day. So for those of you who are not familiar with My Science Work, we have been active on open science for over a decade now across different aspects. So from popularizing research outputs and projects, helping researchers and research institutions with open access publications, providing open source data driven repositories and kind of analytical solutions for scholarly content. So that's essentially the birth of FAIR within the organization. And since then, we have worked a lot on FAIR data and research data management. So today's webinar will be a discussion about operationalizing FAIR principles within the research activities. And that being said, please let me introduce you to today's three panelists and tell you a little bit more about what they have been doing in terms of open science. We have Erik Schultes. He is an author of the original FAIR paper, and he co-developed the 3-point verification framework. This is a practical how-to guide. Guidance for stakeholders on how to go FAIR. And currently he is the international science coordinator to go FAIR at Go FAIR. He is also a member of the Leiden Center of Data Science. And recently, in the recent years, he's been working with a diverse community of stakeholders to develop FAIR data and services, not just within, but also outside the life sciences. We also have Yann Harrow. For 27 years, Yann was at eBiology Group, which is part of the research enabling group at Pfizer in the UK. He is a senior project manager at Pistoia Alliance. He is also director and principal consultant for Yann Harrow Consulting. He is also a project partner at BioExcel, and he has over 30 years of experience in the pharmaceutical and life science industry with a PhD from the University of Cambridge. Yann Mahé is also joining us from Paris. Yann has been working for 12 years, perhaps more, in developing innovative technologies, solutions in the research market and scholarly publishing industry to help researchers and their institutions to better access and analyze and promote their activities and outputs. He is currently the managing director at My Science Work, and I have the good fortune to work with him. And he's also the co-leader of the Open Science Working Group of the French Professional Association for B2B information and knowledge. Welcome, Yann, and Erik, to today's webinar. Thank you for being here. So, when we talk about data stewardship, we talk about this long-term care of valuable digital assets with, of course, the end goal of being these research assets being eventually discovered and reused. But what constitutes as good data management is to an extent ambiguous and also undefined. So more often, this really crucial decision is rather left in the hands of the data or repository owner. And one of the objectives of this webinar is to bring some clarity to the requisites and also the goals of good data management and stewardship. So I invite Dr. Erik Schultes to present to you an overview of FAIR data publishing standards. Erik, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much, Sally, and good afternoon, everyone. Maybe good day. I don't know if you're joining from many international locations. I will share my screen here. And I will attempt to show from the non-presentation mode, if that's okay. If that's a problem, let me know. But Maybe just a quick introduction as well. My own background is in academic biological research in evolutionary biology and biochemistry. Those interests were always data intensive and evolved more and more into fair data interests and that sort of thing. For the last 3 years, I've been full-time at the Go Fair International Support and Coordination Office and now the Go Fair Foundation. And so what I have to present to you today is some very practical outcomes of that experience over the last 3 years working with the stakeholders involved in Go Fair. And this is a really, it's a pleasure to present in this venue because the directives that I received from Sally early on what it is that the topic was, I copied them in here. So, it's the subtitle of this workshop: Fair Data, How Can Principles Become Best Practices, and Operationalizing the Fair Principles. This is exactly sort of the mark that we've been trying to hit in Go Fair. And the title I will give today is Fair Publishing. And it's asking maybe a challenge to those listening to think about what is your fair implementation profile? And I'll explain that in the next few minutes here. Just one word about and I should say too, there was another 4 or 5, I think, directives in the email from Sally. So I tried to embed them in the slides here because I thought that was a very useful way to organize the presentation. So if we think about overviews of fair data in publishing and the standards for that, I wanted to say here that Go Fair in and of itself is somewhat agnostic to standards, and we work with lots of different domains. And so we see it as it is really a task left to those domains that know best the standards and implementation choices that they want to make. But Go Fair is here to support that decision-making process to reach the highest levels of fair possible. And it's also a way to kind of drive convergence among many different groups that are trying to do the same thing. So there's a role here for sticking close to the fair principles and making sure that we get implementations that make sense. And one example of how this might work, in particular with regards to the academic publishers, is a recent article that Jan and I wrote proposing that Go Fair forms a new implementation network called an academic publishers implementation network. So you can see from this short article kind of the approaches that we would have in mind for the network of academic publishers to come together and try to make some joint decisions on fair implementations that could enable fair data and services in that business sector. We're drawing heavily on what Sally had already mentioned, this 3-point verification framework. And again, this is something that has emerged over the course of the last 3 or 4 years in Go Fair. It's very much a bottom-up approach to a very practical strategy for trying to go from a state of non-interoperability and non-machine actionability into higher levels of fairness. Just trying to make a more systematic approach like that, make it easier. And as you can see, obviously there's these 3 components. The first one is focusing on the creation of machine actionable metadata itself. That's this domain of the metadata for machine workshop. The machine actionable metadata that may be created for a particular community, excuse me, then becomes a component of a larger overall fair implementation profile. That's the second component here. And when you have these 2 things, you can very easily then configure different emerging technologies to actually expose that data in a fair way. And this could be classical repositories or new approaches like the Fair Data Point and some other technologies that are emerging. What I would like to do in just the next couple minutes here is take you through briefly what does these metadata for machine workshops look like, and then how does that fit into the overall FAIR implementation profile. So if we focus on metadata first, what we see in the FAIR principles is that, excuse me, is that metadata is everywhere. And in fact, if you can achieve machine actionable metadata for your own purposes, you've actually gone a very long way down the road towards fairness. Principle R 1.3 here at the bottom is worth flagging because it's asking for domain relevant community standards. And this is where, for example, the publishing community might say to themselves, okay, what is our domain relevant community standards and how can we begin to pull that in to our metadata components or to codify that in our metadata. And so a metadata for machine workshop is asking domain experts, domain community members, to sit along with a FAIR metadata expert and then to jointly work together to create FAIR metadata components. And these could be schema, these could be vocabularies and other things. And this is to say that these FAIR metadata are themselves, in a technical sense, FAIR data, that they are technically FAIR elements themselves. They're domain specific, and we know that because we're working with the domain experts. And in the metadata for machine workshop, there's an emphasis, a very strong emphasis on the reuse of existing solutions and to try and to prevent the reinvention of the wheel. And this is realizing that a lot of metadata components are actually quite generic and can be carried over from one application to the other. So in the metadata for machine workshop, we try to keep a watchful eye on that and drive convergence wherever we can. There was also another directive for me today, which was concerning open source tooling that helps make publishing FAIR data easier. And one of the tools we use in a metadata for machine workshop is something called the CDAR workbench. And I won't say much about it here. I won't spend a lot of time, but I want to flag that CDAR is this very powerful application that allows you to almost in a drag and drop fashion to compose metadata schema customized to your own, fit to your own purpose. And that those CDAR templates are connected to BioPortal, which is a very large repository of vocabularies. And you can begin to, you can begin to create web forms that make it very easy to collect machine actionable metadata. So it's a platform where you can kind of author and compose templates that are exposed as web forms. The users who fill in those web forms are creating machine actionable metadata that can be used to track your data your data assets. And we're now working closely with the Wellcome Trust to scale metadata for machine workshops in the context of some Wellcome Trust projects. And this is for the Fairware projects that Wellcome Trust initiated last year. But then again, we can realize that our metadata is only a part of the FAIR picture. There are still other things. And what we've done here is we've listed each of the FAIR principles and we've created over the years, we've created very carefully a set of questions that prompt the user to state in very explicit terms, what are the actual FAIR enabling resources that you would use to implement, say, principle F1 or F2, F3, etc. Just by one example, principle F1 is asking for the use of globally unique and persistent resolvable identifiers for data and metadata. So a question, if you want to go FAIR, is which identifier systems will you be using? And it could be DOIs, but it could be a large number of other different handle systems and other identifier resolution systems. So there's choices there. And by trying to make these choices very explicit, we can begin to work out strategies for implementing in a wise and efficient way how you want to implement FAIR. And this was another question that was directed to me. What are the core requirements for trustworthy digital repositories? And again, GoFair would take a somewhat agnostic view of the answer to this. But what we can do is say that different groups, different repositories will have different implementation choices here regarding FAIR, and that may affect the FAIR robustness of their systems based on those choices. And then just a couple more slides. I wanted to mention that late last year, we had a number of workshops where we worked with 25 different communities to create their FAIR implementation profiles using these tools. Pistoia Alliance and Yann Mahé was among those in the week 47 group. And what I can say is that we've accumulated now a large number, 25 FAIR implementation profiles and ideas about how these communities are trying to implement FAIR. And this gives us a very nice data set in which to begin investigating the best and most optimal reuse of existing resources to try and achieve an overall global convergence on FAIR implementations. There's other kinds of analyses here. Here's the 25 communities we've worked with. The intensity of the color and the matrix is representing the intrinsic overlap in their FAIR implementation profiles. So lastly, I would just leave for those listening today, and for example, my science work, what is the FAIR implementation profile for your organization? And perhaps you can consider using the mini questionnaire or our more advanced tooling to help scope for yourself what a good FAIR implementation profile might be for your purposes. And lastly, I would just like to thank a large number of people and organizations making this work possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Yann. I want to talk right now about the freedom of choice for individual stakeholders to define their own solutions. Now, this is obviously great because it contributes to the widespread adaptation of FAIR principles. But on the other hand, there is this nagging concern that this could also lead to divergences in the interpretation and, of course, subsequently the implementation of these principles can potentially result in incompatible solutions between stakeholder communities. Erik, how can or what are the best practices for institutions to operationalize FAIR principles, but do so with a common and a high-level interpretation of the FAIR principles?
Sure. So, regarding this potential for divergence rather than convergence, when we build a FAIR implementation profile with our tooling, we are capturing these FAIR implementation profiles themselves as machine actionable FAIR metadata or FAIR data. And what that means is that, for example, in this bottom diagram here, the red dots are representing different communities that were independently trying to implement FAIR data and services. And they each compose a FAIR implementation profile. And what you can see is that there is already some intrinsic overlap, sometimes between two communities, sometimes even between three communities. And by illuminating the choices in this way, and by mapping it out, we can then go back to these communities and ask them if they would consider revising their FAIR implementations in order to achieve a higher overlap or higher, proposed interoperability between the communities that they think would be important to interoperate with. Resource overlap is one way to go FAIR. So we could just say to everyone, hey, everybody converge and try to choose the same standards. That's a good directive in general, but it's we know it's not going to be something that's going to succeed in the end. What we can do, however, is establish the intrinsic fairness level of these individual resources, these blue dots. And in this case, for example, by choosing to use, say, DOIs as an identifier system, or an EPIC identifier resolution service, it may be that these two different implementations are in themselves fair. If that's the case, then really what we can say is that these nodes kind of really are overlapping, and then it doesn't matter. And we get the best of both worlds. We allow individual communities to have the freedom to operate, to use whatever implementations they would like, but with a guarantee of a certain level of fairness. So there's a balance definitely between freedom to operate and trying to converge, but there's different ways of attempting to do that, and we can get a handle on it with these fair implementation profiles.
Okay, thank you, Erik, for that. So we talked about principles, we talked in detail about interpretation and implementation. I want to talk about supporting fair data principles from rather an infrastructure perspective. And so the repository technologies that play a key role in managing, preserving, and providing access to digital content. Yann, would you like to hop in now and talk about maybe kind of the core requirements for trustworthy digital repositories? And again, Erik, I did see that you did have a slide prepared about that, so please feel free to join in the conversation as well.
Thank you, Sally. Maybe I can share my screen, try to. And so I hope it's okay. You can see my screen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So good morning and good afternoon or good evening, yeah, depending where you are. So thanks, Sally, for inviting me and to talk about the fair data. And maybe what I would like there to focus on is the role of the repository in the fair data environment. This is more or less what we are doing with my science work, helping a research institution to implement open repository for their research output. So most of you might be familiar with the concept of fair data, I guess, and also I hope that with the concept of repository. But maybe what I suggest is to take some time to refresh a little bit the mind of everybody with the challenges that rose up these last years, and maybe explain how and why repository can play a crucial role for fair data. So the first challenge is with the large amount of data available on the internet, I would say, and the rise of the semantic web, what we call the web 3.0, that has seen an incredible amount of work towards the standardization of metadata exchange around the world. Still, institutions face nowadays major challenges regarding the management of their data. In the scientific area, we notice that with the high number of publications, with the dataset challenges, with the different types of research objects that we would like to collect or put into our repository, like theses, videos, so datasets, reports, working papers, and so on. So clearly there is a challenge there to deal with all that data. However, several standards have been developed during these last years, and they have been developed, I mean, concurrently, and sometimes it's difficult to design bridges between every single one. And moreover, it's often striking to see the discrepancies that exist between solutions to store data into complex databases, and also solutions to harvest, to ingest new documents, and solutions to visualize them in a user-friendly way, and also in a way that we can use it. It's just a base. And so churn infrastructure data to fair data helps to answer this challenge. So that's the first challenge. I mean, it's really an ocean of data and how we can ensure that we can use it. Second challenge is related to open science. I mean, open science brings new perspectives, and that's really a great thing, a great perspective. So we thought that there is an increase of available data, and now that openness is, and I think that openness is really something important in the specific area of science or open access. More recently, I would say open data and in general open science give an incredible opportunity to unlock the potential of digital data for research and researchers. And there is a clear need of fulfilling potentially a gap between researchers' expectation and the use of this data that are now open. And what I would, just a simple question, what is the interest of opening data if we cannot use or reuse it? If you cannot do anything with this open data, it's clearly you will not get a real added value of opening that, of opening it. Sorry. Therefore, getting structure and fair data could be seen as a key to make openness useful for researchers and research. So open access, open data, it's great, but probably without fair principle implementation, it's nothing. Last challenge is that I see there is that there is an increase of available data. There is also more and more open data available, but I think that everything will not have real impact without structuring it. And the thing is that openness is worldwide and it's multidisciplinary, and that is clearly another challenge. And Erik mentioned that a little bit in his presentation. But the thing is that probably different depending when you are around the globe. I mean, and depending the different regional perspectives, we have different approach. So for example, our perspective shows different level of determination and approach regarding fair practices. I think that countries like Netherlands, UK, France, or also Germany, Australia, New Zealand, it's not an exhaustive list, but they are highly active and they try to put in place some national fair policy and roadmap. But this has also to be international. I mean, and if everybody is working only for a specific area, it could be complicated, and fair data could be an answer to that, to the structuration. It's the same with the disciplines, and we can see that there is a big difference depending the disciplines, the discipline, the community of researchers that potentially open their data. So for example, if you are in physics or in biology or in social sciences, you don't have the same implication or conscious of how fair data is useful. And also, probably the implementation of fair data will not be the same. And you will have different, goal to be reached, and very concrete things. And that's, I think, why repository appear as a very relevant solution to bring answers to these different challenges. So what I will do there is explaining, probably not exhaustive, but I will try to address letter by letter, so they have the A, the I, and the R, how repository play an important role for fair principles implementation. But it's important there to know that each of these, every letters of the FAIR cannot be taken independently, and everything is linked. I mean, so clearly, findability, you will have nothing if you don't have interoperability. The same with accessibility and everything. So the presentation there is more a kind of structuration of the presentation, but it's not. I mean, it's not something to be taken independently. And please note that the interlink between these different letters are very important. So first, before to go further, and in order to be clear, I'm not sure if everybody is really has a clear idea of what is a repository. And just to be sure that here I'm talking about the digital platform that holds whole kind of research outputs. It could be publications, articles, all type of publications. It could be also data sets, piece of software, piece of code, I would say, software, that kind of thing. So a repository usually collects files and metadata from different sources. It could be existing systems, so the data and metadata are already stored in the systems, or it could be also researchers that put their files and metadata within this repository. And for the collected metadata, I mean, within this repository, this is an opportunity to turn this data into content readable by humans and machines. And the repositories can support the high quality metadata, I mean, at the end. And this is a kind of workflow that you can implement within the repository to be sure that the collected metadata or the metadata that are uploaded in the systems can be curated in the more appropriate way. And one thing is of course taking into account the discipline-based, regional, or general needs of the different researchers communities. So collected metadata can go through a curation process to ensure that metadata are I mean, as completed and as appropriate as possible. To do this, so repositories can nowadays embed some technologies, and I will not spend too much time on that because probably we can organize just a workshop talking about how technologies can help to make data fair. But it's very important to understand that repositories can remove all the burden of deposit data and metadata into a repository. So you can have some automated tasks like auto classification, extraction of metadata from PDF files, but also technologies that can help to retrieve metadata from other systems, that kind of thing. So then the findability of research output will be enhanced within these repositories thanks to first the search engine that most of the time, and I hope that this is something that you will find within the repositories. So you are a user, you can use a search engine and find information. If it's well structured, it will make your life easier as a researcher. Of course, you can be indexed by external search engine, and very famous one like Google, Bing, or Baidu, or other. And the other important things I think on this findability part is the needs of repository to propose and to suggest like OAP image protocol, so that you can allow a metadata harvesting by other systems. Recently also, and this is something that probably more and more researchers are conscious of, it's that the important increase of unique ID attribution, but for all research objects, like research outputs, like data sets. Also, it could be for a researcher, it could be for an event projects. And that is a great news because this can really help, I would say, all the stakeholders within the research area to find more easily data and metadata and content. So here, repository play three different roles, I would say. The first one is the repository can be linked to, for example, Crossref to generate this unique ID for an article, but it could be also like a permanent URL, a sustainable URL like an handle or ARC ID or another thing. The second role probably is being the repository can be a kind of hub for unique IDs. And when I say that is that the repository can help to create links between these different research objects and supporting link. So if repository support linking between different research objects, it can help to find like related material to articles, to data, to software, and that kind of thing. And the third thing is, of course, supporting the PIDs for authors, funders, funding programs, grants, institutions, and other relevant entities. And so that's something that can be embedded within your repository, and that's very helpful, I think, for findability of metadata. So finally, of course, I think one of the main benefit of repository is to make to allow metadata to be accessible, even if in the cases when resource is no longer available. So after, the other point is accessibility, of course, and accessibility repository can display all information about license and policies related to full text files, but also to metadata. And here the role of repository is very important, I think, for all researchers and users, because this is the information that will allow users to better know what they can do with the data. And for example, in case of repositories collecting sensitive research data, or repositories can have some mechanism that allow the data owners to limit the access to only authorized users. And so you can get the control of your data, and you can exchange your data, but only with the persons you have the right to do so. Also, of course, the accessibility is very important by allowing human and machine authentication and by exposing OAIP image protocol server to all the other systems to harvest metadata, and repository play a role of dispatching research outputs and help research outputs to be spreading around the world. About now interoperability, I think that to do this, so it's mainly here about metadata formats, and that is one of the trickiest things with repositories. No one day say most of the repository just allow to get a kind of duplicate format, and I think that FAIR is really something that can go over the standards that could be useful for specific, of course, the interoperability, but FAIR go beyond that and can help to be more flexible. So metadata formats has been defined to help institution with standardization, of course, of research outputs metadata, but I would say that our own experience at MyScienceWorks shows that we can have some solutions to work on different kind of metadata formats and help to go beyond that and be sure that we can be more flexible regarding the needs of the different research and disciplines community of researchers. And so Dublin Core is fine, but now we see data sites and we see also other metadata formats, and getting a system that is able to answer and to respect these metadata formats to interoperability is fine, but to get a specific metadata format for the whole database and your own repository can really help to achieve this FAIR goal. Okay, one thing important there is that also you can use for interoperability, you can use control vocabularies coming from external system, and that is something very helpful. I mean, just getting the support of existing standard for country, languages, code, or publications types, access status. So of course, respecting certain standards could also help repository with that and to structure data, of course. So I would say that at this point, also getting a repository able to push data towards other systems, like institutional website, open repositories, other open repositories, is very helpful, because it can help to keep the control of the data, as I said, get the curation process and be sure that you are maintaining a high level of quality for your metadata and exposing high level of quality of your metadata, but giving this openness also will help to increase the visibility and findability. And the last thing is reusability, and it's very important for open science, as everybody know. And by displaying information about license related to content, as we said, file, but also metadata, repository give clear keys, I would say, in information of for the users, and so they can reuse the content, the content, and they know the conditions to do it. So going in the same direction, repository must display the access status of a file, for example, dataset, research output, as I say, and all information about legal, ethical statements that have to be included in the metadata record. So you can find data protection, commercial constraint, sensitive information, and about sensitive and ethical statements. I think that it could be very, very important to get this information. I mean, we are now living the crisis of the COVID-19, and we know that there is a lot of information about patients that are that have been sharing and needs to be shared. But how you will do it, respecting all the ethical and legal statements for making this sharing real. So regarding all this information, I think it's one of the main important things for reusability. The other thing is, of course, repository can help in that sense that the repository can provide a clear support for data citations like citable PIDs, as we said, or sustainable link to the content, to the metadata. And this is clearly something that can help users and researchers. And finally, repositories provide metadata in human readable and machine readable format, and that can also and the repository can also set up an API to support full text harvesting, and also maybe some text and data mining services. So in that way, it can help to other organizations to use your content within your repository with other services. Finally, repository clearly play a major role to enhance, I would say, findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of the content. Last but not least, repository has also a great communication channel, I think, to increase the fair data implementations. And so it is a way to help researchers to better understand why it is so important and how they can make the data fair. I mean, you can give some instructions, you can train the researchers, the users, and explain why it is so important. So repository definitely can help to expose and promote the benefits of fair data.
Thank you, Yann. That was very insightful. Thank you for that presentation. Erik, I saw that you had a slide about this. Did you want at this point to jump in and maybe talk a little bit about core requirements for trustworthy digital repositories?
No, I didn't have a slide specifically on repository requirements, but I did mention in the chat that what Yann has just done is something that looks very familiar to us who conduct FAIR implementation profile workshops, that we go systematically through the FAIR principles, and we actually have an ontological term. We have considerations for each of the principles. Those are the factors that are involved in the implementation choices you ultimately make. So whether it's a combination of Dublin Core and DataCite or something, or whether it is a handle system, an ARC system, these are all choices. And you have many factors that will impact your ultimate choice of technology. But I think up until now, up until recently, many of these choices have been made somewhat, at an implicit level, that there's a lot going on here that maybe isn't always clear to the user. And I think what we're getting better at, I think what we can see from Yann and then from the work from our FAIR implementation profiles, is we're getting better at making these choices explicit. And then maybe that makes it easier and well, it makes it easier to come to implementations that are serving your purposes, but it's also maybe making it just more efficient to get to convergence on these things. So I really enjoyed it, Yann. That was a nice presentation.
Speaking of infrastructure and design quality, Yann, you were the project lead at Pistoia Alliance for the FAIR implementation project. So naturally, you are no stranger to the challenges institutions face when it comes to the implementation part of FAIR data principles. At this stage of the webinar, I would like to talk about actual use cases. In your case, within the life science industry, and what can you share with us? Can you share with us the transition from principles to practices, the consideration, the approach Pistoia Alliance, for example, took to embed FAIR principles into the data management process?
Yeah, okay, I will do that by talking about the insights we've gained from building a FAIR toolkit for the life science industry. And I will take you through how we've done that. But first, I think I'll start with exactly who the Pistoia Alliance are and what we do. So just spend a couple of minutes on this slide explaining that. So the Pistoia Alliance is a non-profit members-led organization. It was established over 10 years ago, and it's all about reducing barriers to life science research and development. It's sustained by over 120 paying member organizations, and these consist of a variety of large enterprises such as pharmaceutical companies, smaller technology SMEs, science publishers, institutes and universities. So it's quite an interesting mix of organizational members and individual members. And the Pistoia Alliance delivers webinars, workshops and conferences, toolkits such as the one I'm going to talk about now, standards and publications. And we also have pre-competitive communities of interest and projects. So this FAIR toolkit has come from the FAIR implementation project for life science industry. And I'd also like to acknowledge all the important people before I go into the presentation. So all members of the FAIR implementation project, especially the project champions, Martin Romacker, Alexandra Greb-de-Baron and Tom Plastra, also Rama Balakrishnan, Raina Winnenberg, Andrea Splendiani, Peter Willard and Ted Slater. And then you can see a number of organization logos here on the screen. These are all Pistoia Alliance funders for this specific project, as well as project members. So hopefully that sets the scene as to for the Pistoia Alliance. So let's turn to data management. Data management and FAIR. So data management is nothing new, of course, but the need for it and doing it well is growing. Okay, so let's go back to 40 years ago in the 1980s. You would largely find, especially in industry, relatively small laboratories, and the science was done in a largely hypothesis-driven manner. And then through the 1990s, high throughput screens came to the fore, and so the amount of data is growing. So you're typically looking for new leads, hit to lead part of research in the R&D pipeline. And then in the 2000s, omics studies came to the fore because the human genome was sequenced, and we moved into the big data era where you are looking to discover new science through data mining, basically. So you're still testing hypotheses, of course, that will never go away, but you've moved to this data discovery mode. And this is now, in the last 10 years, just grown more and more. So we're in the era of big data. There are many V's. There's volume, there's velocity, there's veracity. There are numerous V's out there, which, as well as complexity and heterogeneity. So what all of this does is you've really got to be on top of your game for data management. And this is where the FAIR guiding principles really do help. And the driver here isn't, making data fair in itself is not an end result. What it's all about is getting more value from your data. So through tools and services, that is what you'll manage to accomplish through good, fair data management, is you're deriving much greater value from your data. So let's move along. So the fair guiding principles are here in these quadrants, and Erik's eloquently described the principles, so I won't dwell on those. Just to make a few points on the right side of this slide, fair enables data reuse at scale by machines as well as humans. So machine resolvability of data and metadata is really key here. Another point to make is that these FAIR principles are in themselves not actually a standard, okay? They are very useful guiding principles, and they can be implemented in many different ways because they're not a standard. Now, the Research Data Alliance have now, last year, they published a very fulsome technical specification for the FAIR principles, and that's probably the closest we're getting to an actual standard. So that is the RDA, Fair Data Maturity Model. So that's where you will find metrics, specification, and the means to evaluate in a very systematic manner. So that's the closest we are to a standard with FAIR at this point in time. Okay, so now I'll tell you a bit about how the FAIR implementation project came to develop the FAIR toolkit. In 2018, we had a number of workshops going through to 2019. Three in particular were very important to allow us to realize that actually one of the biggest practical difficulties with FAIR implementation is just where do you start with this? So our FAIR toolkit is all about starting the FAIR journey, as we would call it. Okay, because making data fair, really, it's a mindset and you are going on a journey. It does not make sense to try and make all data perfectly fair. That is not a useful end goal. You really have to be driven by what is your business need, what is your application, and that in itself, understanding that determines what is fair enough, what is an appropriate level of investment to realize an acceptable level of fairness, and that's really important. So the concept for our FAIR toolkit is where we've begun. This was at the beginning of 2019, and we realized it would be really useful to put in one place a number of use cases, showing the benefits of why making data fair really brings value. And we also realized that there are a number of methodologies which are really useful. Some of them can be seen as technical tool-like methodologies. And we had in mind to pull together a number of those. We ended up with 6, you'll see. People and training, really important, of course, for implementation of FAIR. The scientists who are doing this, because FAIR really is a bottom-up movement, are so important. So having datathon workshops where you're bringing your own data and you're sharing how you make data fair and what that means, defining the competencies of a data steward, that's really important, and that's defined in our toolkit, as well as the description of a generic workflow for verification, and that is also in our toolkit. A fourth component of our toolkit, part of the methods, is change. Change management, again, is so important for the implementation of FAIR. And we picked on 3 aspects of change management: readiness for change, change agent networks, which is basically networks of data stewards and other really important stakeholders in a community, or in the case of industry, a business area is the most likely community that's meaningful, as well as FAIR capability maturity modeling, which are the different levels of maturity that you can find within an organization, where the organization can understand how it is implementing at an organizational level the investment in infrastructure that it takes to support making data fair. So that was conceptually what we had in mind to build into our toolkit. We assembled relevant content using a simple wiki So that's how we begun pulling together what could go in the toolkit, so we could make decisions on what is the most relevant for the audience who are actually funding building this toolkit. So that's life science industry companies in particular. So the wiki was really important for pulling together such relevant content, as shown on this slide. And then we designed a suitable structure for our toolkit, and through a wireframe prototyping mechanism, we got feedback from our project members and the Pistoia members more broadly. And we had 3 levels in mind: a homepage with obvious things, address, such as what's in the toolkit, who is it for, etc. A second level for navigating basically around the more detailed third level, which consists of those different aspects I've just covered in the concept slide, use cases, and then the 3 types of method: tool, training, and change. And also an aspect which addresses not only who we are, but also why FAIR matters in very succinct terms, as well as the practicalities of making use of this toolkit. So the other thing I'll mention is we also have a Pistoia Alliance project called User Experience for Life Science, which had built another toolkit a little bit earlier, which we took learnings from, because a lot of user experience methodology not only became the content of that particular toolkit, but it really gave great learning and enabled us to build this second FAIR toolkit much more efficiently and more likely to be usable and useful for our users. So this is the landing page. We launched this toolkit in the middle of 2020 last year. It is freely accessible for anybody on the internet. I give the URL in the bottom left-hand corner here, fairly straightforward URL. The toolkit landing page covers those sections I mentioned: what is in the toolkit, who is it for, and then there are little card glimpses of samples of use cases. Then at the next level for the use cases, you can see at this moment in time, we have 5 use cases. And these are cards giving access to the next level, which I'll show in the next slide. We are growing the number of use cases in our toolkit. There are 5 at the moment, and we are looking to attract further submissions to our toolkit. So this is at the more detailed level, the 3rd level. And here are 2 examples of use cases. On the left, we have a use case from Roche, pharmaceutical company. And this is where Roche have built a platform called Edison, where they have implemented prospective verification of data. This is where the data coming from outside the company is loaded into their systems so it is fair by design. And also the data they're collecting in their own laboratories are also brought into this Edison platform, so it meets a minimal level of fairness. So that is a very useful use case, describing how they've gone about that and the benefits, etc. The second example I'm showing on this slide is from a small technology service company called The Hive, and they've given a great use case around verifying collaborative research on real-world data. This has come from the IMI Eden project that they're sharing as a use case. Again, a very useful example of the benefits of making data fair. Moving along to some example methods for tools, training, and change, those 3 different aspects of method that can be found in our toolkit. I've just given an example of each of those here. You'll see that there is a consistent structure to how we've built each of the web pages. So on the left, we have an example of data management plans, a very useful methodology. When you're planning to do your science, having a data management plan definitely helps you to ensure your data is more likely to be made fair. Data stewardship competencies, we make use, you'll notice, of other people's resources. We do not want to reinvent wheels here. We are pulling together really high quality content and giving the source full acknowledgement. Likewise, on the right is the data capability maturity modeling method, which is also found in our toolkit. So this slide, quite a busy slide, shows you how on the left side at the second level are the cards that describe the 6 tool methodologies, the 3 training methodologies, and the 3 change methodologies. On the right is a kind of simplified view of what is in those methodologies in the toolkit. And the arrows, the blue arrows on this slide, gives you an idea of the relationships between tools, training, and change methods. So obviously the maturity indicators for findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, those are likely to be used together, although there may be different emphasis depending on the application, the business need on particular aspects of FAIR. I've already mentioned data management plans. Another really important judgment to be made in terms of what is fair enough is to consider the data granularity and context when making data fair. Training, data workshops, data stewardship, and verification workflow process, all really important aspects of training. And these also relate to the different change methods. We've got 3, as I've said. So this hopefully conveys an idea of how these different methods in our toolkit can be used individually and also in a coordinated manner. So in summary, I've taken you through who is the Pistoia Alliance and what we do. And I've touched on how our toolkit addresses the question why fair data matters to life science industry. For the toolkit, we've built relevant content gathered and selected in a wiki by industry data experts for industry scientists. It's been designed for practical support in starting the FAIR journey with industry use cases and methods such as tools, training, and change. And it's freely accessible from a user-friendly website. Here's the URL again. So the future direction we're going in is we're growing and sustaining the FAIR toolkit. We're looking to add new use cases and new resources as they emerge. And we're also, now we're putting heavy effort into the big task of seeing how we can bring FAIR implementation to clinical and healthcare data. We're looking to build a best practice guide to navigate the numerous clinical standards, the common data models, and the numerous vocabularies and ontologies that are useful for clinical. And this is, again, all about to get much greater value through FAIR data so that the data is reused over a much longer period of time, rather than being, as it isn't for clinical, very often locked in silos, only used for the primary purpose of satisfying regulators to show a new drug has efficacy and safety. The data really needs to be released so you go far further than that for more secondary use. And that's the exciting enabler that FAIR brings to all of this. So that was my last slide.
Thank you, Yann. That was very insightful. We are running out of time, but perhaps I will ask one question from our panelists. Tony Davis asks, what role do you see for the international scientific unions, who are the standardization bodies for scientific vocabularies? Would you like to take this one, Erik? Oh, Yann.
I can mention two places that are really useful. There is the OBO Foundry, which is a great collection of high quality ontologies for biomedical research. That's one. The second one, of course, is the bioportal, the NCBO's bioportal, which is another much bigger actually collection of ontologies and vocabularies. So I would recommend tapping into both of those. As a third one that's worth a mention is EMBL EBI's ontology lookup service, because they host 250 ontologies as well. So those
Yeah,
are very useful.
Sorry, could you please repeat that, because Pradeep did not catch
That
it.
was EMBL EBI, Ontology Lookup Service, is a kind of portal access to a repository of more than 250 ontologies. There's overlap, by the way, between these different repositories of ontologies and vocabularies. You will find overlap, but they are the three places that you go to first, I would recommend.
Erik and Yann, did you want to add to the question?
Yeah, well, maybe just to complement Ian's statement, because I know Tony was asking also about the role of scientific unions. And so we've had a chance through our co-data associations to work with scientific unions, for example, the American Geophysical Union. And what we see is that in general, large, prestigious, important organizations are slower to move in terms of making commitments to some vocabularies or to some kind of implementation choices. And that's rightly so. I mean, they're big organizations. They've got a lot of, let's say, people following, and a lot hinges on the standards that they are recommending. So what we've done with the fair implementation profile approach, very explicitly, we allow for even very small communities to create their fair implementation profile, because we think that's where most of the innovation and just overall commitments are going to happen fastest and in the most agile way. And the hope would be then that we create a world of fair implementation profiles very quickly that can then consolidate later on into by larger and larger organizations sort of adopting and reusing fair implementation profiles for their purposes. So if small groups can kind of road test these things, and then the larger organizations can kind of monitor that and take up new fair standard collections when they think it's appropriate.
Thank you, Erik.
The other place I would mention as a place to go to if you're looking for policies, standards, collections, a whole raft of really useful resources is the Fair Sharing website.
Thank you, Erik, and thank you, Yann. Well, unfortunately, we are running out of time, and this has been most enlightening. So thank you very much, Ian, Yann, and Erik, for your precious time and your valuable insights. A big thank you to those of you joining us live and lighting up the chat. So I hope to welcome you here again on 29th of April. That's a Thursday, where I will be bringing together a panel of experts to discuss something beyond fair, but nevertheless more urgent, as urgent, I would say, urgent topic of the moment. So global economic implications post-pandemic. So stay tuned for that. And we'll be communicating about that on our social media channels. So My Science Work, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And we'll see you then. Stay safe and see you soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you, Sally. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for being here.